Chapter 11. Lucy Westenras' Diary. 12th September. How good they all are to me. I quite love that dear Dr. Van Helsing. I wonder why he was so anxious about these flowers. He positively frightened me. He was so fierce, and yet he must have been right, for I feel comfort from them already. Somehow I do not dread being alone at tonight, and I can go to sleep without fear. I shall not mind any flapping outside the window. Of the terrible struggle that I have had against sleep so often of late, the pain of sleeplessness, or the pain of the fear of sleep, with such unknown horrors as it has been for me. How blessed are some people whose lives have no fear, no dreads, to whom sleep is a blessing that comes nightly and brings nothing but sweet dreams. Here I am tonight, hoping for sleep, and like Ophelia in the play, with virgin trance and maiden stutesman. I never liked garlic before, but tonight it is delightful. There is peace in its smell. I feel sleep coming on already. Good night, everyone. Dr. Seward's Diary. 13th September. Called at the Berkeley and found Dr. Van Helsing, as usual, up to time. The carriage ordered from the hotel was waiting. The professor took his bag, which he always brings with him now. Let all be put down exactly as I found it. Van Helsing and I arrived at Hillingham at around 8 o'clock. It was a lovely morning. The bright sun and all the fresh feeling of the early autumn seemed like the completion of nature's annual work. The leaves were turning all sorts of beautiful colors, but had not yet begun to drop from the trees. When we entered, we met Mrs. Westenras coming out of the morning room. She was always an early riser. She greeted us warmly and said, "You'll be glad to know that Lucy is better. The child is still asleep." I looked into her room and saw her, but did not go in, lest I should disturb her. The professor smiled and looked quite jubilant. He rubbed his hands together and said, "Aha! I thought I had diagnosed the case. My treatment is working." To which she answered, "You must not take all the credit for yourself, doctor. Lucy's state this morning is in due part to me." "How you do mean, madam?" asked the professor. "Well, I was anxious about the dear child in the night and went into her room. She was sleeping soundly, so soundly that even my coming didn't wake her. But the room was awfully stuffy. There was a lot of those terrible strong-smelling flowers about everywhere, and she actually had a bunch of them around her neck. I feared that the heavy odor would be too much for the dear child in her weak state, so I took them all down and opened a bit of the window to let the fresh air in. You will be pleased with her, I am sure." She moved off into her boudoir, when she usually breakfasted early. As she spoke, I watched the professor's face, and saw it turn ashen gray. He had been able to retain his self-command whilst the poor lady was present, for he had known her state and how mischievous a shock would be. He actually smiled on her as he held open the door for her to pass into her room. But the instant she had disappeared, he pulled me, suddenly and forcefully, into the dining room and closed the door. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw Van Helsing break down. He raised his hands over his head in a sort of mute despair, and then beat his palms together in a helpless way. Finally, he sat down in a chair and put his hands before his face, began to sob, with loud, dry sobs that seemed to come from the very racking of his heart. He then raised his arms again, though as thoroughly as though appealing to the whole of the universe. God, he said. What have we done? What has this poor thing have done, that we are so sore beset? Is there fate among us still? Settled down from the pagan world of old, that such things must be and such things in such way? This poor mother unbeknownly, and all for the best as she thinks, does such thing as lose her daughter body and soul. But we must not tell her, we must not even warn her, or she die. Then both die. Oh, how are we beset? How are all the powers of the devil against us? He suddenly jumped to his feet. "Come," he said. Come, we must see an act, devils or no devils, or all devils at once, it matters not. We fight him all the same. He went to the hall door for his bag, and together went up to Lucy's room. Once again I drew open the blind, whilst Van Helsing went towards the bed. This time he did not start as he looked on the poor face of the same awful waxen pallor as before. He wore a look of stern sadness and infinite pity. "Ah, as I expected," he muttered, with that hissing inspiration of his which meant so much. Without a word, he went and locked the door, and began to set out on the little table the instruments for yet another operation of transfusion of blood. I had long ago recognized the necessity, and began to take off my coat, but he stopped me with a warning hand. "No," he said. "Today you must operate. I shall provide. You are weakened already." As he spoke, he took off his coat and rolled up his sleeve. Again the operation, again the narcotic, again some return of color to the ashen cheeks, and the regular breathing of heavy sleep. This time I must watch while Van Helsing recruited himself and rested. Presently he took an opportunity to tell Miss Westenras that she must not remove anything from Lucy's room without consulting him, that the flowers are of a medicinal value, and that the breathing of the odor was part of the system of cure. He then took over the care of the case himself, saying that he would watch tonight and the next, and would send me only word when it was to come, only then. After another hour, Lucy waked from her sleep, fresh and bright, and seemingly not the worse for her terrible ordeal. What does it all mean? I am beginning to wonder if my long habit of life amongst the insane is beginning to tell upon my own brain. Lucy Westenras' diary. 17th September. 4 days of night and nights of peace. I am getting strong again, that I hardly know what to do with myself. It's as if I've passed through some long nightmare and had just awakened to see the beautiful sunshine and feel the fresh air of morning around me. I have a dim remembrance of a long, anxious time of waiting and fearing, the darkness in which there was not even the pain of hope to make the present, the distresses more poignant, and long spells of oblivion, and the rising back to life as a diver coming up through the great pressure of water. Since, however, Dr. Van Helsing has been with me, all these bad dreamings seems to have passed away. The noises that usually frighten me out of my wits, the flapping against the window, the distant voices that seemed so close, the harsh sounds that came from when I know not where and commanded me to do I know not what, have all ceased. I go to bed now without fear of sleep. I do not even try to keep awake. I have grown quite fond of the smell of garlic, and a boxful arrives for me every day from Haarlem. Tonight, Dr. Van Helsing is going away, as he has to be for a few days in Amsterdam, but I need not be watched. I am well enough to be left alone. Thank God for Mother's sake, and dear Arthur's, and for all of our friends who have also been kind to me. I shall not ever feel the change, for last night Dr. Van Helsing slept in his chair a lot of the time. I found him asleep twice when I woke, but did not fear to go to sleep again, although the boughs and the bats and something napped almost angrily at the window panes. The Pall Mall Gazette, 18th September. The Escaped Wolf. Perilous adventure of our interviewer. Interview with the keeper of the Zoological Gardens. After many inquiries and almost as many refusals and perpetual using of the word Pall Mall Gazette as sort of a talisman, I managed to find the keeper of the section of the Zoological Gardens for which the wolf department included. Thomas Builder lives in one of the cottages in the enclosure behind the Elephant House, and was just sitting down to his tea when I found him. Thomas and his wife were hospitable folk, elderly and without children, and if the specimen I enjoyed of their hospitality be the average kind, their lives must be pretty comfortable. The keeper would not enter onto what he called business until supper was over, and we were all satisfied. Then, when the table was cleared, he lit his pipe and said, "Now, sir, you can go on and ask me all you want. You'll excuse me for refusing to talk professional subjects before meals. I gives the wolves and the jackals and the hyenas in our sections their tea before I begins to ask them questions." How do you mean, ask them questions? I queried, wistfully to get him into a more talkative humor.
Hitting them on the head. Hitting them on the head with a pole is one way, scratching their ears is another, when gents is as flush want to be a bit of a show-off to the gals. I don't so much mind the first, the hitting them with the pole after they chunks them into their dinner, but I'll wait until they've had their sherry and coffee, so to speak, after I tries it on the ear scratching, mind you, he added philosophically. There's a deal of the same nature in us as in them, these animals. Here you are coming and asking for questions about my business, and that I am grumpy like for your bloomin' afterquid that I have seen you blowing up for, I answer. Not even when you asked me sarcastic like if I'd like to ask you, the superintendent, if you might ask me some questions. Without offense, I tell you to go on to hell.
You did?
And when you said you'd report me for using the obscene language, that I was hitting me over the head, but after a quid made them all right, I went to go into fight. I wasn't going to fight, so I waited for the food and did my old with the wolves and the lions and the tigers does. But Lord love you, I ain't now that the old man boomstick is stuck in a chink with her tea cake with me, and raising me up to a boiling old teapot, and I've hit lipped. You may scratch my ears for all you're worth, and won't get even a growl out of me. Drive along with your questions. I know what you're coming at. It's the other escape wolf.
Exactly. I want you to give me your view of it. Just tell me how it happened. When I know the facts, I'll get you to what to say you consider the cause of it, and how you think the whole affair will end.
All right, Governor. This here be the whole story. That werewolf will be called Berserker was one of the 3 grey ones that come up from Norway to Dracula, which we brought off about 4 years ago. He was a nice, well-behaved wolf that never gave nobody a trouble to talk of. I was almost surprised for Adam waiting to get out or any other animal in the place. But there, you can't trust wolves no more than me or women.
Don't mind him, sir,
spoke Mr. Tom with a cheery laugh.
He's got minding the animal so long that the blasted if he ain't the old wolf himself. But there ain't no harm in him.
Well, sir, it was about 2 hours after feeding yesterday, when I first heard my disturbance. I was making up a litter in the monkey house for a young puma which was ill, but when I heard the yelping and howling, I kept him straight. I came straight away. There was Berserker, tearing like a mad thing at the bars as if he wanted to get out. Wasn't much people around that day, and close at hand was only one man, a tall, thin chap, with a hook nose and a pointed beard and a few white hairs running through it. He had a hard coat look and red eyes, and I sort of misliked him to him, for it seemed as if he was in him that he was irritated at. He had white kid gloves on his hands, and he pointed at the animals to me and said, "Keeper, these wolves seem to be upset at something."
Maybe it was you, said I, for I did not like the airs he was giving off himself.
Maybe it was you, says I, for I didn't like the airs he was giving off himself. He didn't get angry as I opted he would, but he smiled a kind of insolent smile, mouth full of pearly sharp white teeth. "Oh no, they wouldn't like me," he says. "Oh yes, they would," says I, imitating him. "They always like a bone or two to clean the teeth with around tea time, which is you as bagful." Well, it was an odd thing, but when the animals seen us talking, they laid down, and when I went over to Berserker, he let me stroke his ears same as he ever. Then that man came over, and blessed if he didn't put his hand and stroke the old wolf's ears too. "Take care," I says. "Berserker is quick." "Never mind," he says. "I'm used to him." "Are you in the business yourself?"
says I, taking off my hat for a man who's trading wolves. Architecture is a good friend to keepers and all. No, he says, not exactly in the business, but I have made me several pets of them. And with that he lifts up his hat as polite of a lord and walks away. Old Berserker kept looking at him until he was out of sight. Then went and laid down in the corner and wouldn't come out of that whole haven. Well, last night, so soon as the moon was up, the wolves all begun howling. It wasn't nothing for 'em to howl at. There wasn't no one except for someone who was evidently calling a dog somewhere out back in the gardens of the Park Road. Once or twice I went out there to see if I was all right. And it was, and then the howling stopped. Just before 2 o'clock, I took a look around turning in, and bust me, but when I came outside of old Bully Berserker's cave, I see the rails broken and twisted, and the cage empty. And that's all I know for certain.
Did you see anything else?
One of the old gardeners was coming up from home about time from army. So when he sees a big dog coming through the garden edges. At least he says, but I don't give much to it myself. For if he never said a word about it to his missus when he got home. It was only after the escape of the wolf that was made known, and we ended up been up all night hunting for the park for that berserker, that he remembered any seeing anything the other like. My own belief is that the army had got him in the head.
Now, Mr. Biddler, can you account in any way for the escape of the wolf?
Well, sir, he said in a very suspicious sort of modesty, I think I can, but I don't know how you be satisfied with the theory.
Certainly I shall. If a man like you, who knows the animals from experience, can't hazard a good guess at any rate, who's to even try?
Well, sir, all counts for this way. It seems to me that the wolf escaped simply because he wanted out.
From the hearty way that both Thomas and his wife laughed at the joke, I could see that it had been done in service before, and that the whole explanation was simply an elaborate sell. I couldn't cope in blandage with the worthy Thomas, though I thought I'd keep a surlier way to his heart. So I said, Now, Mr. Biddler, we'll consider that first half sovereignty worked off, and this brother of his is waiting to be claimed, so you've told us that what you think will happen.
Right you are, sir, he said briskly. You'll excuse me, I know, for a chaffing of you, but the woman here winked at me, which means to be going on telling. Well, I never, said the old lady. My opinion is this. That 'ere wolf is hiding somewheres. The gardener didn't remember when the gardener said he wouldn't remember that he was galloping north faster than a horse could go. Well, I don't believe him. For you see, sir, wolves don't gallop no more than dog does. They're not being built that way. Wolves is fine things in a storybook, and I dare say they gets into packs. Does shivering something that's more feared than they is. They can make a devil of a noise and chop it up, whatever it is. But oh, bless your life, in real life, a wolf is a low creature. Not half so clever or bold as a good dog, but and not as half as quarter as much of him in a fight. This one ain't been so much used to fighting or even proving himself, and more like he's somewhere around the park hiding and shivering of, and if he thinks at all, wondering where he got his breakfast from, or maybe he's down some area or in some coal cellar. I wouldn't some cook get a rum start when she sees his greens are shining out from it in the dark. If he can't get his food, he's bound to go look for it, and mayhaps he have a chance in the light of a butcher shop in time. If he does it, then some nurse may come walking off from the soldier, leaving him half in the penumbrator. Well, then I should be surprised if the census is one body less, that's all.
I was handing him the half-sovereign, when something came bubbling up against the window. Then Mr. Biddler's face doubled its natural length in surprise.
Oh, God bless me, he said. If it ain't old Berserker, come back himself.
He went to the door and opened it. A most unusual proceeding, it seems to me. I'd always thought that a wild animal never looks so well as when some obstacle of pronounced durability is between us. A personal experience has intensified, or rather diminished that idea. After all, however, there is nothing like custom, for neither Biddler nor his wife thought any more of the wolf than I should say of a dog. The animal itself was as peaceful and well-behaved as that of the father of all picture wolves, Red Riding Hood's quondam friend, whilst moving her confidence in masquerade. The whole scene was utterly a mixture of comedy and pathos. The wicked wolf that for half a day had paralyzed young London and set all the children in town shivering in their shoes was there in a sort of pertinent mood, and was received and petted like some sort of vulpine prodigal son. Old Bittler examined him all over with the most tender solicitude, and when he had finished with his pertinent, he said, "Yeah, I knew the old chap wouldn't get into some kind of trouble. Didn't I say that all along? Here, his head is a cut and it's full of glass. He's been getting over the bloomin' wall or something. It's a shame the people are all allowed to top their walls with broken bottles. This here what comes of it. Come on, Berserker!" He took the wolf and locked it up in a cage with a piece of meat that satisfied, in quantity at any rate, the elementary conditions of the fatted calf, and went off to report. I came off too to report that the only exclusive information to give today regarding the strange escapade at the zoo. Dr. Seward's Diary. 17th September. I was engaged after dinner in my study, posting up my books, when, through press of other work and the many visits to Lucy, had fallen sadly into array. Suddenly the door was burst open, and in rushed my patient, with his face distorted with passion. I was thunderstruck, for such a thing as a patient getting out of his own accord in the superintendent's study is almost unknown. Without an instant's pause, he made straight for me. He had a dinner knife in his hand, and as I saw he was dangerous, I tried to keep the table between us. He was too quick and too strong for me, however, and before I could even get my balance, he had struck me and cut my wrist severely. Before he could strike again, however, I got him in my right hand, and he was sprawled on the backside of the floor. My wrist bled freely, and quite a pool of blood trickled on the carpet. I saw that my friend was not intent on further efforts, and occupied myself with banding the wrist, keeping a wary eye on the prostrate figure all the time. When the attendants rushed in, and we turned our attention to him, my employment positively sickened me. He was lying on his belly on the floor, licking it up like a dog. The blood that had fallen from my wounded wrist. He was easily secured, and to my surprise, went with the attendants placidly, simply repeating over and over again, "The blood is life! The blood is life!" I cannot afford to lose blood just at present. I have lost too much of late for my physical good, and then the prolonged strain of Lucy's illness and the horrible phases is telling on me. I am overexcited and weary, and I need to rest. Happily, Van Helsing has not summoned me, so I need not forego my sleep. Tonight, I could not do well without it. Telegram, Van Helsing, Antwerp, to Seward, Carfax. Sent to Carfax, Sussex, as no county given. Delivered late by 22 hours. 17th September. Do not fail to be at Birmingham tonight. If not watching all the time frequently, visit and see that flowers are as placed. Very important. Do not fail. Shall be with you as soon as possible after the arrival. Dr. Seward's Diary. 18th September. Just off the train to London. The arrival of Van Helsing's telegram filled me with much dismay. A whole night lost, and I knew by bitter experience what might happen in the night. Of course, it is possible that all is very well, but what may have happened? Surely there is some horrible doom hanging over us, to every possible accident should thwart us in all that we try to do. I shall take this cylinder with me, and then I can complete my entry on Lucy's phonograph. Memorandum. Left by Lucy Westenras. 17th September, night. I write this, and leave it as to be seen, so that no one may by chance get into trouble through me. This is an exact record of what took place tonight. I feel I am dying of weakness, and barely any strength to write, but it must be done if I am die in doing I went to bed as usual, taking care of the flowers for which which were placed by Dr. Van Helsing directed, and soon fell asleep. I was waked by the flapping at the window, which had begun after the sleepwalking at the cliff at Whitby when Mina saved me, and which I now know it so well. I was not afraid, but I did not wish that Dr. Seward was in the next room, as Dr. Helsing said he would be, so that I might call him. I tried to sleep, but could not. Then there came to me the old fear of sleep, and I determined to keep awake. Perversely sleep would try to come when I did not want it to, so I feared to be alone. I opened my door and called out, "Is anybody there?" There was no answer. I was afraid to wake Mother, so I closed the door again. Then outside in the shrubbery I heard the sound of a howling, like a dog's, but more fierce and deeper. I went to the window and looked out, but could see nothing except a big bat, which had evidently been buffeting its wings against the window. So I went back to bed again, and determined not to go to sleep. Presently the door was open, and Mother looked in. Seeing by my moving that I was not asleep, came in and sat by me. She said to me that even more sweetly and softly as her wont, I was uneasy about you, darling, and came to see if you were all right. I feared she might catch cold standing there, and asked her to come in and sleep with me, so she came into bed and lay down beside me. She did not take off her dressing gown, for she said she would only stay a while and then go back to her own bed. As she lay there in my arms, and I in hers, the flapping and buffeting came to the window again. She was startled and a little frightened, and would cry out, "What is that?" I tried to pacify her, and at last succeeded, and she lay quiet, but I could hear her poor heart still beating terribly. After a while, there was the low howl again out in the shrubbery, and shortly after, there was a crash at the window, and a lot of broken glass was hurled to the floor. The window blind blew back with the wind rushing in, and in the aperture of the things, she clutched the wreath of flowers, and in the aperture of the broken panes, there was the head of a great, gaunt, grey wolf. Mother cried out in fright, and struggled up in a sitting position, and clutching wildly for anything that would help her. Amongst other things, she clutched the wreath of flowers that Dr. Van Helsing insisted on my wearing around my neck, and tore it from me. For a second or two she sat up, pointing at the wolf, and there was a strange and horrible gurgling in her throat. Then she fell over, as if struck by lightning, and her head hit my forehead and made me dizzy for a moment or two. The room and all round seemed to spin around, my eyes fixated on the window, but the wolf drew back his head, and a whole myriad of little specks seemed to come blowing through the window, and wheeling and circling round like the pillar of dust that travelers describe when there is a summon in the desert. I tried to stir, but there was some spell on me, and dear Mother's poor body, which seemed to grow cold already, for her dear heart had ceased to beat, weighed down on me, and I remembered no more for a while. The time didn't seem too long, but very, very awful till I recovered consciousness again. Somewhere near, a passing bell was tolling. The dogs all around the neighborhood were howling, and in our shrubbery, seemingly just outside, the nightingale was singing. I was dazed and stupid with pain and terror and weakness, but the sound of the nightingale seemed like the voice of my dead mother coming back to comfort me. The sound seemed to have awakened the maids too, for I could hear their bare feet pattering outside my door. I called to them, and they came in, and when they saw what had happened and what laid on the floor over me on the bed, they screamed out. The wind rushed through the broken window and slammed to, and the door slammed too. They lifted off the body of my dear mother and laid her, covered with a sheet, on the bed that after I got up. They were all so frightened and nervous that I directed them to go to the dining room and have each a glass of wine. The door flew open for an instant and closed again. The maid shrieked, and they then went a body into the dining room, and I laid what flowers I had on my dear mother's breast. When they were there, I remembered what Dr. Van Helsing had told me but I did not like to remove them, and besides, I would like some of the servants to sit up with me now. I'm surprised when the maids did not come back. I called them, but got no answer, so I went to the dining room to look for them. My heart sank when I saw what had happened. There, all 4 bodies lay on the floor, breathing heavily. The decanter of sherry on the table half full, but there was a queer, acrid smell about. I was suspicious and examined the decanter. It smelled of laudanum, and looking on the floor I found the bottle which my mother's doctors used for her. Did use. Was empty. What am I to do? What am I to do? I am back in the room with Mother. I cannot leave her, and I am alone save for the sleeping servants who someone had drugged. Alone with the dead. I dare not go out, for I can hear the low howl of the wolf through the broken window. The air seems full of specks, floating and circling in the draught of the window, and the light burning blue and dim. What am I to do? God shield me from harm this night. I shall hide this paper in my breast, so that when they find it, when they come to lay me out. My dear Mother God, it is time that I go too. Goodbye, dear Arthur. If I should not have survived this night, God keep you, dear. And God help me.